Year 0. From silence, history began to speak. In a small province of Rome, a silent birth would divide time itself. While emperors ruled with iron and pride, a child was born among the poor. Stars guided shepherds through the desert night toward a humble manger. In the stillness of that dawn, hope found a name. Thus began the era that would change the soul of humanity forever. Year 1. A new faith whispered through the desert winds. Rome stood at the height of its glory, ruling lands from ocean to desert. Legions marched beneath the eagles of Caesar, carrying the weight of empire. Far from palaces, unknown lives began to shape the faith of centuries to come. The world turned slowly, unaware that history had already changed its course. Between the glory of Rome and the whisper of a new belief, humanity took its first breath. Year 2. Empires watched as a promise took its first breath. The Roman Empire expanded like a tide of marble and iron. Roads stretched across continents, carrying soldiers, merchants, and stories. In distant lands, ancient gods were worshipped under new names. Among the forgotten, a message of peace began to whisper in the dark. The world grew vast, yet a single faith was quietly being born. Year 3. The world moved, unaware of the light among them. The empire's banners waved from Britannia to the sands of Arabia. Cities rose like monuments to eternity, carved in stone and pride. The Caesars called themselves divine, and the people believed. Yet, in a humble province, a carpenter's son began to walk among men. Power ruled the earth, but something greater had already begun. Year 4. Voices rose in temples and streets, seeking meaning. Rome celebrated victories, unaware of the quiet dawn rising in Judea. Across deserts and temples, prophets spoke of change and redemption. In the night skies, comets and stars were seen as omens of divine will. The empire expanded outward, while faith began to grow within. The heavens watched in silence. History had already chosen its path. Year 5. In humble lands, destiny began to weave its path. Rome stood, adorned in marble and power, center of the known world. Senators debated beneath golden domes as the legions guarded the frontiers. Far away, a child's laughter echoed through the narrow streets of Nazareth. The empire built monuments to eternity, yet eternity watched from a humble home. Greatness filled the earth, while divinity learned to walk upon it. Year 6. The old gods trembled as new hope spread. Rome's banners waved across continents, spreading law and fear alike. Roads of stone connected kingdoms under the will of the Caesars. In a small village, a young boy began to ask questions that no teacher could answer. The empire looked outward, building empires of conquest. But in the heart of Judea, truth was learning the language of men. Year 7. The empire thrived, but its soul began to shift. The empire's roads stretched farther than ever before, veins of control and trade. Merchants, soldiers, and messengers carried Rome's will across the world. In temples of marble, incense rose to countless gods demanding devotion. Yet, in quiet homes, new prayers were whispered to an unseen God. The empire built roads of stone, but faith began paving roads of the soul. Year 8. Messengers carried words that would outlive kings. Rome's armies guarded borders that seemed endless beneath the sun. The Senate whispered of power, gold, and loyalty to emperors unseen. In the eastern provinces, people prayed for peace, not conquest. A carpenter's hands shaped wood that would one day shape the world. Glory filled the empire, but destiny waited in silence. Year 9. The century opened its eyes. The world awaited its fate. The empire seemed eternal, its borders vast and unbroken. In Rome, triumphs filled the streets with music and the scent of victory. Yet, in the north, dark forests hid tribes that feared no eagle nor crown. Far from the marble cities, a child looked to the stars and wondered why they shone. Peace reigned in the empire, but the world was holding its breath. Year 10. The Empire marched beneath the shadow of its own greatness. Rome stood quiet after years of conquest, its legions resting under foreign suns. Roads, walls, and laws bound the known world under Caesar's will. In hidden corners, voices of prophets spoke of mercy, not war. The empire's heart beat in marble halls, but its soul wandered among the poor. A golden peace covered the earth, calm before the storm of faith. Year 11. Legions built roads where wilderness once ruled. The empire thrived in wealth and discipline, a machine of order and pride. Marble cities glittered under the sun, while distant provinces bled in silence. Messengers carried Caesar's words faster than the wind itself. Yet, in the east, a voice began to speak of forgiveness instead of glory. History turned quietly, as if time itself had started to listen. Year 12. Marble rose. Ambition whispered. Destiny waited. Roman legions marched across mountains and deserts, carrying the empire's shadow. New cities rose along the frontiers, built from conquest and ambition. In hidden villages, teachers spoke of a kingdom not made by hands. The empire sought to rule the body, but not the spirit. Between the march of soldiers and the whisper of faith, destiny began to divide. Year 13. Across the empire, peace looked eternal, and so did pride. The legions carried Rome's banner deeper into unknown lands. Villages burned, temples fell, and statues of new gods replaced the old. The empire believed it was eternal, unshaken, divine. But in the silence of Galilee, a young man listened more than he spoke. While Rome conquered the earth, heaven was preparing its reply. Year 14. The emperor's crown passed, and Rome held its breath. The Emperor Augustus, father of empire and peace, took his final breath. The throne passed to Tiberius, shadowed by power and doubt. Across the provinces, statues of the new Caesar rose to kiss the sky. Yet in small towns, the hearts of men began to turn toward something unseen. A new ruler ascended the throne, but another kingdom was already rising. Year 15. A new Caesar rose, colder and wiser than before. Emperor Tiberius ruled with silence and fear, a shadow in the halls of power. Rome obeyed, its citizens bound by laws older than mercy. In distant lands, storms of rebellion whispered through the provinces. Among the poor, hope began to move like a quiet wind. Power watched from its throne, unaware that faith had begun to breathe. Year 16. The legions obeyed. Loyalty was Rome's heartbeat. Under Tiberius, the empire stood vast but uneasy, bound by order and silence. Governors ruled with iron, their words carrying the weight of Rome. In markets and fields, whispers of new teachings began to travel from mouth to mouth. The empire heard only echoes, not realizing they were prayers. The first seeds of faith had taken root beneath the stones of empire. Year 17. Whispers of rebellion echoed in the far provinces. Rome's legions guarded peace through fear, their banners bright beneath the sun. Provinces paid tribute in gold, grain, and silence. In the villages of Judea, strangers spoke of a teacher who saw beyond the law. His words were simple, yet they burned brighter than the torches of empire. And so began a story that even Caesar could not command. Year 18. The empire's peace was heavy, built on fear and iron. The empire counted its victories, believing peace eternal beneath its banners. In distant Judea, a young man spoke of light, mercy, and truth. Crowds gathered not for gold or glory, but for words that healed their hearts. The empire watched without concern, blind to what was awakening. The voice of a teacher began to echo louder than the drums of Rome. Year 19. In shadows and marble, history prepared its next breath. Across Judea, whispers of a healer and teacher spread from town to town. Fishermen left their nets and wanderers found a reason to walk together. His words carried neither sword nor crown, yet kingdoms trembled at their sound. The rulers watched from afar, uncertain whether to fear or ignore him. The world's greatest empire had no defense against faith. Year 20. The empire stretched beyond sight, yet unrest grew beneath its peace. The empire marched forward, its laws firm, its gods silent. In Judea, a man spoke of love stronger than empires and death alike. Crowds listened, divided between faith and fear. The rulers saw unrest, not revelation. The heart of humanity had begun to awaken. Year 21. New voices rose in the deserts, speaking of kingdoms not of this world. Rome's banners still shone in the sun, symbols of a power unchallenged. Yet, in the hills of Galilee, a voice spoke truths no empire could command. The poor found courage, and the weary found peace. Priests and rulers saw danger in words that freed the soul. Between the temple and the throne, destiny began to choose sides. Year 22. Faith began to move where armies could not. Rome's peace rested on control, not harmony. In Judea, crowds followed a man who healed without wealth and ruled without throne. His words reached soldiers, merchants, and beggars alike. The temple feared losing obedience. The empire feared losing order. Faith had become rebellion, and love a threat to power. Year 23. The Senate debated, the legions waited, and destiny watched in silence. The empire spoke of peace, but its peace was built on fear. In Jerusalem, voices argued over law and salvation. The teacher's words divided families and united strangers. Spies followed his steps, searching for a reason to silence him. The storm was coming, not of swords, but of truth. Year 24. The old gods grew quiet as new words spread among men. The empire watched Judea with suspicion, a restless land beneath Roman rule. In crowded streets, the teacher spoke of kingdoms not built by men. The temple's leaders heard his words as threats wrapped in parables. His followers grew in number, their faith stronger than fear. Truth had taken human form, and power could no longer ignore it. Year 25. Rome's laws ruled the world, but not every heart. Rome ruled the world with legions and law, believing nothing could shake its throne. But in the hills of Judea, a man spoke words that outlived marble and empire. The sick were healed, the lost were found, and the proud began to tremble. The temple feared rebellion, the empire feared faith. The light had found its path, and it led straight to the cross. Year 26. In dusty towns, miracles were whispered like forbidden tales. The rulers of Judea met in secret halls, speaking not of truth, but of fear. His words move the people, they said, and no law can bind them. Messengers carried whispers to Rome, asking for judgment from distant power. The empire listened without faith, but with interest. In the heart of Jerusalem, darkness began to prepare its trial. Year 27. The empire watched, unaware that time itself was turning. The teacher walked through villages and deserts, his words echoing like wind over stone. Crowds followed him not for miracles, but for meaning. The blind saw, the broken stood, and the hungry found peace. The priests saw danger, the empire saw disorder. The road to Jerusalem had begun, and history held its breath. Year 28. Power spoke from marble halls, but truth walked among the poor. The city of Jerusalem shimmered with dust, prayer, and expectation. Crowds gathered, shouting blessings to the man who came without an army. Palms waved, and the streets echoed with hope and confusion. In the shadows, power took note and made plans. The people welcomed peace, not knowing it was walking toward the cross. Year 29. A cross's shadow began to stretch across the world. The city that once sang his name now whispered it in fear. Among his friends sat the one who carried silver in his heart. Torches moved through the night, searching for a light to extinguish. The teacher was taken, not by power, but by prophecy. The world held its breath. Dawn would come through darkness. Year 30. The world held its breath as heaven and earth collided. The sun rose over Jerusalem, but the city felt colder than ever. A cross was raised on a hill, and silence fell upon the earth. The sky darkened, the veil tore, and the world seemed to stop. The teacher's voice faded, but his words did not die. From death came life, from sorrow, eternal light. Year 31. A man's death shook empires more than any war. At dawn, the stone was rolled away, and the world was never the same. The guards fled, the tomb was empty, and fear turned to wonder. Whispers of resurrection spread through alleys and deserts alike. The empire heard rumors, but could not understand them. From a silent grave, faith began to conquer the world. Year 32. From despair rose a faith no sword could silence. From fear was born courage, and from silence a new voice rose. The disciples walked dusty roads carrying no weapons but words. In markets and ports they spoke of a kingdom unseen but alive. Some listened in awe, others turned away in anger. The faith of a few began to challenge the power of an empire. Year 33. The cross became a symbol stronger than the throne. In small homes and secret places, the followers gathered in silence. They broke bread, shared stories, and spoke of a living truth. Soldiers patrolled the streets, unaware that faith had already entered Rome. No temples, no crowns, only hearts willing to believe. And so, in the shadows, the church was born. Year 34. Whispers of resurrection defied the order of kings. Along the roads once built for war, new travelers carried words of peace. The empire's roots became the veins of a living gospel. In Antioch and Damascus, strangers spoke the same hope in different tongues. Persecution began in whispers, the first sparks of fear. But the fire of faith spread faster than the empire's shadow. Year 35. Across dusty roads, disciples carried light through darkness. The Empire heard of the new believers, not as citizens, but as rebels of the soul. They refused to bow to idols or emperors, standing firm in unseen truth. The prisons filled with prayers instead of silence. Some were broken by chains, others by flame, yet their faith did not die. The earth drank their blood, and from it the church grew stronger. Year 36. Rome ignored what it could not understand. The Empire struck harder, believing fear could silence faith. Chains, prisons, and swords became the language of Rome's justice. But every captive whispered the same name with unbroken conviction. The message spread in secret, carried by hands that trembled yet believed. The more Rome tried to burn the truth, the brighter it shone. Year 37. The Empire buried a teacher and planted a revolution. Messengers of the new faith crossed deserts and seas without fear. In every market and port, the story of the risen one found new ears. The Empire could control borders, but not belief. Some converted in secret, others proclaimed it under threat of death. What began in a single tomb was now alive across nations. Year 38. New faith spread through prisons, palaces, and whispers. In Asia Minor and Syria, strangers spoke the same hope in different tongues. Merchants carried not only goods, but the gospel in whispers and symbols. Some mocked, others listened, and a few believed. The Empire's roads became the veins of an unseen kingdom. What Rome built for conquest, faith used for salvation. Year 39. The world changed quietly, forever divided between power and belief. In Rome, whispers of a new god began to stir among slaves and nobles alike. In secret chambers, prayers rose higher than the marble of temples. The Empire, built on obedience, began to tremble at invisible rebellion. Faith crossed walls and castes. It spoke to the soul, not the title. Even in the emperor's city, the cross began to cast its shadow. Year 40. Rome ruled the earth, but new voices spoke of heaven. Rome began to notice what it could not control: belief. Governors questioned how whispers could defy the law. Orders spread quietly: watch, report, silence. But the faithful met in darkness, their candles outshining fear. The empire ruled the body. Faith had conquered the soul. Year 41. A dagger ended a tyrant, and another emperor rose from the ashes. After the death of Tiberius, a new emperor rose, young, adored, and feared. His name was Caligula, the child of empire and madness. He crowned himself a god and demanded worship in the temples of men. Blood filled the marble halls where prayers once rose. Rome had gained a god and lost its soul. Year 42. The empire learned that crowns could fall overnight. Caligula ruled through fear, declaring himself divine above gods and men. His cruelty turned Rome's laughter into silence. Statues of his image filled temples where prayers once belonged to heaven. Yet in darkened homes, believers whispered of a true king unseen. While madness ruled the palace, faith began to rule the heart. Year 43. Legions crossed the sea and brought Rome to the island of Britannia. The madness of Caligula could not last. Even fear has its limits. In the marble halls, daggers spoke what voices dared not. The emperor, who called himself a god, fell by the hands of his own guard. Rome exhaled in relief, yet its soul remained wounded. Power can kill a man, but never a myth. Year 44. Conquest and betrayal shared the same table. After the blood of Caligula dried, Rome searched for order once more. Claudius, scholar and survivor, was crowned by fear rather than ambition. The empire rebuilt its walls, but could not repair its faith. Far from Rome, disciples preached a kingdom untouched by politics. The world had a new emperor and a growing faith he could not see. Year 45. Cities flourished under marble and law, but hearts wandered elsewhere. Under Emperor Claudius, the empire found peace through structure and fear. Roads opened again, and merchants carried more than goods. They carried stories. Across Asia Minor, new voices spoke of one God and endless mercy. The faithful gathered in houses, not temples, united by bread and hope. The empire believed it ruled the world, but the word had already begun to rule hearts. Year 46. In hidden rooms, faith gathered strength. The empire's roads once carried soldiers. Now they carried apostles. In cities like Ephesus, Corinth, and Philippi, strangers gathered to share the same faith. Letters began to travel faster than legions, bearing words of courage and grace. The empire expanded its borders. The faith expanded its hearts. The word had found its wings. Year 47. Messengers carried truth along the empire's roads. A man named Paul set sail across the blue waters of the Mediterranean. He carried no army, only words that could move mountains. In synagogues and marketplaces, he spoke of a kingdom without borders. Some welcomed him with open hearts, others with stones in their hands. And so the faith began to sail, farther than any empire ever dared. Year 48. The sword ruled by day, but the word ruled by night. Ships carried not just traders, but the voices of those who spoke of Christ. In ports and taverns, sailors repeated tales of miracles and mercy. Paul and his companions faced storms on the sea and in the soul. Each new land brought danger and disciples. The gospel had learned to travel with the wind. Year 49. The empire stretched to its limits, and so did its destiny. The apostles gathered in Jerusalem, seeking unity in a growing faith. The question was not who could believe, but how all could belong. Voices rose in debate, but wisdom spoke through grace. The message of Christ opened its doors to every nation. The church had chosen not law, but love. Year 50. The empire shone brighter than ever, but its shadows grew longer. Guided by dreams and destiny, Paul crossed the sea into Macedonia. For the first time, the gospel touched the soil of Europe. In Philippi, Lydia listened by the river and believed. A new chapter began where the empires of men had failed. The word had reached another world, and it would never turn back. Year 51. Roads of stone carried legions and ideas. In the city of Thessalonica, Paul wrote to believers who faced fear with faith. His letters carried comfort, wisdom, and the promise of return. Across Greece, small gatherings turned into living churches. Rome heard rumors of a people who called no emperor Lord. From ink and faith, scripture began to be born. Year 52. Marble cities rose, proud as gods. In Corinth, Paul preached to merchants, philosophers, and wanderers alike. The temples of Aphrodite and Apollo loomed over a city of wealth and desire. Yet, in humble homes, hearts turned from stone to spirit. The wise debated, the faithful believed. The truth had entered the house of idols and refused to leave. Year 53. Power smiled, unaware of the storm it had sown. From Ephesus, Paul wrote to distant believers, words that crossed seas and hearts. His letters carried more power than swords, more endurance than stone. The faithful gathered, reading by candlelight what emperors could not erase. Each word bound cities together in one unseen kingdom. Rome built roads of stone. Paul built roads of spirit. Year 54. A boy became emperor, and Rome became a stage. The young Nero rose to the throne, promising art, peace, and glory. Rome celebrated, unaware it had crowned its own fire. Music filled the palaces, and silence filled the prisons. The church watched from the shadows, growing like a seed beneath stone. Beauty reigned in Rome, but madness waited in its halls. Year 55. Gold and blood mixed beneath the emperor's crown. Nero ruled with charm and cruelty, his smile hiding the shadow of tyranny. The Senate obeyed, poets flattered, and Rome applauded its golden prince. In secret, prisons filled with those who dared to speak truth. The faithful met in silence, praying for courage, not revenge. The emperor wore a crown of gold. Others bore one of thorns. Year 56. Poets sang of glory while truth hid in shadows. In the depths of a Roman cell, Paul wrote words the world would never forget. Rejoice in suffering, he wrote, for truth cannot be imprisoned. Outside, Nero's feasts drowned the cries of the poor. The empire celebrated pleasure. The faithful celebrated purpose. From the darkness of prison, light continued to spread. Year 57. Fire danced in marble halls, unseen but coming. From Corinth, Paul wrote of love, a force greater than law or empire. Love is patient, love is kind, he wrote, and the world listened. The streets of Rome echoed with pride, but hearts began to echo with hope. Letters replaced temples, faith replaced fear. While Nero ruled with spectacle, Paul ruled with words. Year 58. Faith and fear walked the same streets of Rome. Paul returned to Jerusalem, carrying faith and the weight of prophecy. Crowds turned from praise to anger. Stones followed words of peace. Soldiers intervened, not knowing they guarded the messenger of eternity. Chains bound his hands, but not his purpose. The road to Rome had begun, not by choice, but by destiny. Year 59. Whispers of madness reached the throne. Bound in chains, Paul boarded a Roman ship bound for Italy. The sea roared, and the storm became his judge. Sailors despaired, but Paul spoke of faith that no wave could drown. The ship shattered upon the rocks, yet every soul was saved. Even the storm had bowed to grace. Year 60. The empire stood vast, but its heart began to tremble. The gates of Rome opened for a chained man with an unchained spirit. He walked the streets of emperors, speaking of a kingdom not built by hands. Citizens, slaves, and soldiers listened. Some mocked, others wept. The empire ruled the world, but could not rule his words. The gospel had reached the throne of Caesar. Year 61. Rebellion flared in distant lands. Even queens defied Rome. In a rented house, under guard, Paul spoke to all who dared to visit. His chains clinked like bells of truth in the heart of Rome. Letters flowed once more, to Philippi, to Ephesus, to Colossae. Even Caesar's household began to whisper the name of Christ. The prisoner had become the teacher of an empire. Year 62. Luxury drowned wisdom in the marble halls. Paul remained a prisoner, yet his words walked freely through the city. Soldiers who guarded him began to guard his message. The faithful met in catacombs, where stone could not silence spirit. Rome's torches burned bright, but another light was rising. The faith of one man had become the fire of many. Year 63. The emperor dreamed of art while the empire whispered of decay. Paul walked free once more, his steps guided by grace, not empire. He traveled through Italy and Greece, strengthening the faithful and the weary. His words now carried the weight of time and of prophecy. Rome glittered with gold, unaware that its walls hid the spark of eternity. The apostle had sown enough seeds to outlive the world. Year 64. Flames devoured Rome, and innocence burned with it. Flames rose higher than temples, devouring the heart of Rome. For 7 nights the city burned, and even the gods seemed to flee. The people cried for justice, and Nero pointed to the Christians. Torches burned in the gardens of the emperor, human and holy. The empire watched in horror, and the church was baptized in fire. Year 65. Voices of faith rose from ashes, stronger than fear. The persecution spread like smoke, unseen, choking, relentless. Peter was taken and led to the cross. He refused to share upright. Paul faced his sentence with calm, his words sharper than the blade. The earth drank the blood of its bravest souls. From their deaths, the faith found eternal life. Year 66. The emperor sang while the world mourned. In Jerusalem, anger rose like dust beneath Roman boots. The people took up arms, tired of tribute and desecration. Rome answered with legions, iron and fire. Temples became fortresses, and prayers turned to battle cries. The holy city stood defiant, a storm before destruction. Year 67. Blood filled the arenas, and silence filled the prisons. The rebellion raged through Judea, and the empire prepared its vengeance. Vespasian marched with legions, cold as iron and sure as death. City after city fell beneath the Roman standard. Blood and prophecy flowed through the same streets. Jerusalem awaited its fate, and heaven held its breath. Year 68. Fire devoured an empire built on madness. The emperor, Nero's madness, reached its final act. Rebellion spread from Gaul to Spain, led by ambitious generals. The Senate turned against him, and the praetorians deserted. Facing capture, Nero took his own life, ending the Julio-Claudian line. Rome plunged into chaos. The empire trembled, awaiting a new ruler. Year 69. Blood chose the emperor, not the Senate. With Nero gone, Rome had no master, only rivals. Galba seized the throne, but his rule was brief and bloody. Otho and Vitellius rose in turn, each claiming the purple with steel. Civil war devoured provinces and legions alike. From the east, Vespasian marched, a soldier destined to restore Rome. Year 70. From the ashes of Jerusalem rose the pride of Rome. Vespasian stood firm as emperor, bringing order to a bleeding empire. His son Titus led the Roman legions against rebellious Jerusalem. The city burned as the second temple fell in sacred flames. Thousands perished, and the treasures of Zion were carried to Rome. The Flavian dynasty was born, forged in fire and conquest. Year 71. Triumph echoed through marble streets. Peace returned to Rome beneath the banners of the Flavians. Titus and Vespasian celebrated their triumph, parading the spoils of Jerusalem. The Arch of Titus rose as a monument to victory and divine favor. Across the empire, cities were rebuilt and order restored. The scars of war faded, but Rome's hunger for glory remained. Year 72. Stone by stone, eternity took form. Vespasian strengthened the empire's borders and its heart. In Judea, the last rebels made their final stand at Masada. The Romans built mighty roads, forts, and aqueducts across the provinces. In Rome, work began on a monument to entertain gods and men alike. The Colosseum was born, symbol of might, spectacle, and eternal Rome. Year 73. The last rebels fell, and silence returned to the desert. On the cliffs of Masada, the last defenders of Judea awaited their fate. Surrounded by Roman legions, they chose death over slavery. When silence fell, the eagle of Rome ruled unchallenged. Vespasian's authority stretched from Britain to the deserts of Arabia. The empire stood united, vast, disciplined, and unstoppable. Year 74, the empire rested, a giant catching its breath. After years of war, the empire breathed in peace. Vespasian rebuilt cities, temples, and the faith in Rome's destiny. Trade flourished across the Mediterranean. Gold, wine, and grain flowed like rivers. Veterans received lands, and new colonies spread Roman law and language. The Flavian peace began, a calm before new storms to come. Year 75. Rome rose again, crowned in marble and glory. The Flavian Age reached its height of glory and ambition. The Colosseum's walls rose higher, stone by stone, toward the heavens. Rome became a living monument, marble, might, and memory. Artists, architects, and philosophers thrived under imperial peace. The eternal city glowed again, reborn from fire and ruin. Year 76. A child of destiny walked beneath Roman skies. The empire stood vast and proud beneath the rule of Vespasian. New roads carved paths through forests, deserts, and distant frontiers. In Rome, a child named Domitian grew in the shadow of greatness. Legions guarded peace from the Rhine to the Euphrates. The Flavian dynasty's power seemed eternal, and so did Rome. Year 77. The legions marched toward the edge of the world. Rome looked outward once more, toward distant seas and misty lands. Agricola led the legions deep into the wilds of Britannia. Forts rose on cold hills, and the Roman eagle faced the northern winds. In Rome, Pliny the Elder compiled his great natural history. Knowledge and conquest marched side by side beneath the Roman sun. Year 78. Conquest and order spread hand in hand. The legions of Rome pushed deeper into the misty lands of Britannia. Governor Agricola brought discipline, roads, and Roman law to the frontier. Fortresses rose across the north, securing the empire's furthest edge. Rome's power stretched from deserts to frozen highlands. A fragile peace reigned, built on legions, loyalty, and fear. Year 79. Fire fell from the heavens. Pompeii's last door. The empire wept for its builder. Emperor Vespasian was dead. His son Titus rose to power, noble and loved by the people. But nature turned cruel. Mount Vesuvius awoke in fury. Pompeii and Herculaneum vanished beneath fire and ash. Rome mourned, yet remembered. For even in ruin, greatness endured. Year 80. The Colosseum roared. Rome was reborn in spectacle. Emperor Titus sought to heal an empire scarred by disaster. The Colosseum opened with grand games and rivers of spectacle. Beasts, gladiators, and glory filled the heart of Rome. Crowds cheered as emperors watched beneath the blazing sun. For a brief moment, Rome felt eternal once again. Year 81. The throne changed, but ambition remained. Rome mourned as Emperor Titus died suddenly, loved by the people. His brother Domitian took the purple, proud and ambitious. He promised to restore Rome's morals and strengthen its borders. Temples and monuments rose. Glory returned, but so did fear. A new era began, one of power, control, and silent shadows. Year 82. Power spoke with a single voice and demanded silence. Domitian ruled with iron discipline and divine ambition. He proclaimed himself Lord and God, demanding worship and obedience. Forts rose on the Rhine and the Danube to guard Rome's borders. Senators whispered in fear, while spies thrived in marble halls. The peace of Rome endured, but beneath it, unease began to stir. Year 83. Glory called from the forests beyond the Rhine. Eager for glory, Domitian marched north to the German frontier. The legions crossed dark forests where Rome met the unknown. Battles raged against fierce tribes beyond the Rhine. Victories were uncertain, but triumphs were loudly proclaimed. Domitian returned to Rome in triumph, his power now unquestioned. Year 84. Rome's eagle reached the misty highlands. In the misty highlands of Caledonia, Rome faced its final northern foe. Governor Agricola led his legions through fog and fire. At Mons Graupius, the Romans crushed the tribes of the north. The survivors fled into the mountains, the edge of Rome's world. The empire stretched from the sands of Africa to the mists of Scotland. Year 85. War returned to the northern frontier. From beyond the Danube came a new and ruthless enemy, the Dacians. Their raids struck Roman camps and burned frontier towns. Domitian sent his generals east, but victory proved costly and uncertain. The legions fought in forests drenched with blood and fear. The Danube became Rome's new frontier, fragile, vast, and restless. Year 86. The Danube flowed red beneath Roman steel. The Dacian threat grew stronger beyond the Danube's restless waters. Domitian reformed the legions and created new commands for the frontier. Fortresses and watchtowers rose along the northern border. Rome's generals sought revenge, but the forests devoured their victories. The emperor vowed that Rome would never bow to the Dacian king. Year 87. Defeat whispered Rome's mortality. The Dacian wars raged on beyond the Danube's turbulent flow. The Roman legions faced ambushes in mountains, thick with mist and death. General Cornelius Fuscus marched boldly and met disaster. His army was destroyed, his standards captured by the Dacians. Rome burned with shame, and Domitian swore vengeance. Year 88. Vengeance burned brighter than victory. Rome struck back. Vengeance for Fuscus and the fallen legions. General Tetius Julianus led the counteroffensive across the Danube. At Tapai, steel clashed with fury and honor was reclaimed. The Dacians retreated, but the war was far from over. Rome had won a battle, yet lost its peace. Year 89. Rebellion rose within the heart of the empire. The empire trembled, not from foreign wars, but from rebellion within. Lucius Antonius Saturninus, governor of Germania, rose against Domitian. For a brief moment, the legions stood divided. Rome against Rome. Loyal forces crushed the revolt before it could spread. Domitian's trust shattered. Suspicion would now rule his reign. Year 90. Silence became survival beneath the emperor's gaze. Domitian ruled as both emperor and censor, master of all words and deeds. The Senate obeyed in silence, and statues of the emperor filled every city. Poets and philosophers spoke in whispers. Truth had become dangerous. Spies listened in banquets, temples, and homes. Rome glittered in marble, but its heart beat in fear. Year 91. The people cheered while daggers hid in shadows. To silence fear, Domitian gave the people games and splendor. Gladiators clashed in the Colosseum beneath banners of the Flavian eagle. The emperor watched from his golden throne, adored and feared alike. While the crowds roared, senators plotted in whispers. Rome danced in the light, unaware that shadows were closing in. Year 92. War and paranoia marched side by side. From the Danube frontier came new uprisings among the Sarmatians and Dacians. The Roman legions marched once more through rivers of mud and blood. Battles raged in forests of iron and fire, victories bought with heavy loss. Domitian claimed triumph, though the frontier still bled. The empire stood strong, but the emperor's paranoia grew stronger. Year 93. Order ruled, but freedom had forgotten its name. Fear ruled Rome more than the emperor himself. Senators vanished, accused of treason, their names erased from stone. Informers grew rich while loyalty meant silence. The philosopher Epictetus taught patience amid tyranny. The empire glittered in order, but crumbled in spirit. Year 94. A man became a god, and Rome his altar. Domitian crowned himself consul for life, lord of Rome and destiny. Temples rose in his honor, and prayers were whispered in his name. The empire obeyed one voice, divine, unquestioned, absolute. Yet, beneath the marble calm, plots began to stir in silence. The shadow of betrayal crept closer to the throne. Year 95. The empire glittered, but its ruler stood alone. Suspicion poisoned every corner of the imperial palace. Domitian purged senators, generals, and even his own kin. Fear became law, and silence the only safety. Statues watched as daggers hid behind loyal smiles. The emperor stood alone, surrounded by marble, shadows, and lies. Year 96. Blood washed the marble. A tyrant's end. The tyrant's reign ended in blood within his own chambers. Domitian fell to the blades of his servants and the whispers of the Senate. The Flavian dynasty died with him. Fear gave way to fragile relief. The Senate hailed Nerva as emperor, wise and cautious. Rome exhaled, uncertain but free again. Year 97. Wisdom returned, soft as morning light. After years of fear, Rome breathed under Emperor Nerva's gentle rule. He restored freedoms, recalled exiles, and mended the wounds of tyranny. But the legions doubted his strength. The army trusted steel, not mercy. To secure peace, Nerva adopted a soldier of unmatched virtue, Trajan. A new dawn rose. The empire prepared for greatness once more. Year 98. From Hispania came a ruler forged in virtue. Emperor Nerva died peacefully, leaving behind a healed empire. The legions proclaimed Trajan a soldier, a leader, a Roman to the core. From Hispania came the first emperor born outside Italy. Justice, strength, and ambition marked his rise. The age of the 5 good emperors had begun. Year 99. The century ended, and Rome stood eternal. Trajan ruled with wisdom, strength, and quiet determination. He restored discipline to the legions and justice to the provinces. Roads, bridges, and cities rose again under his steady hand. The people rejoiced. Rome had found its emperor of virtue. The first century ended, and Rome stood at the height of its power.